The brothers WISP. The brothers WISP, brothers WISP. The brothers WISP. The brothers.
Hey everyone, this is Tommy with the Brothers WISP. Just getting our sponsors because I totally spaced mentioning them. They're super great because they help us do this and keep everything afloat. And it's a nice little bit of change for doing fun things. So first off, our Patreons. We have a new Patreon. Let's see here. Megan Y. Let me double check on that one. Yep, Megan Y. Introduced her in the Slack, and super cool to see new people showing up. Thanks for supporting us and helping the Brothers WISP. Shout outs are Sonar, a scalable, intuitive, and comprehensive ISP billing and operational support system. Learn more at Sonar.Software. Tower Coverage is your RF propagation system to empower your network, real-time data metrics, enable your coverage area, reaching your customer base, and more. The industry's best RF propagation mapping system allows website integration for customer sign-up and pre-qualification. Use this data to scientifically plan network expansion and help your WISP succeed. Get a free trial today at towercoverage.com. Woof. Preseam is an edge network QoE solution that enables proactive management of the network and subscriber experience to achieve higher customer satisfaction while lowering operational costs and increasing revenue. Preseam is made by Ateo Networks, whose goal is to enable local and regional ISPs to thrive by solving network problems with products that people love. Launched in 2017, Preseam has helped more than 400 ISPs in the US and around the world deliver better internet to their subscribers. And we're also brought by Villo, a complete mesh Wi-Fi hardware and remote management solution that empowers WISP of any size to delight your customer, reduce your operating costs, and grow your business. Designed with input and feedback from the ISP community, Villo is proud to be a trusted partner of over 150 ISPs around the world. You can find out more at store.villoliving.com. If you want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/thebrothersWISP, throw a few bones there. You can get into the Slack. That's the $8 a month tier, and a lot of great people there helping out, answering questions, and we also have a lot of vendors who are participating in that as well. So if you have questions directly for vendors, they could be more than happy to help, and they do that a lot. So, and on to the show. Hey everybody, this is Tommy with the Brothers WISP. This is going to be a special episode. Today we have a really special visitor on the cast, Mr. David Zumwalt.
Good afternoon or good day. Thanks, Tommy.
Yeah, so he is the Chief Executive Officer of WISPA, and he got put in that position back in May, as I recall.
Started June 1st, officially. I was working behind the scenes in May, and the BEAD NOFO dropped on May 13th, so my tack went to redline pretty quickly, even before I stepped into the job.
Yeah, you were having to go full pedal to the metal because our previous Claude was he was a crazy guy even in the first place. So I just was kind of hoping to introduce you to the industry, introduce you to the Brothers WISP crowd, and kind of talk about what WISPA does and the various things that make your life busy. Also with us today, I have Jeremy below me here.
Hey guys.
You're up in Alaska time. David, where are you hailing from?
I'm in Central Time right now.
Okay. All right. So David, how about you just give us a little bit of I got the really great opportunity to meet with you shortly after you started in Indianapolis. We had there was a conference there, and you came and gave a talk to the crowd there, and I gotta hear a little bit of your background. So I was hoping to kind of get some ideas on let everyone know, why are you so brilliant?
Oh. I have to pay him $20 every time he says something nice about me here, but no, I'm kidding. So I've been in the telecom industry for most of my career. I had a grandfather and an uncle who were in the old AT&T organization pre-divestiture. The point I'm saying here is just that I had a lot of encouragement to consider going into the telephone business. But when I started to do that while I was in college and then also coming out of college, I realized that I wanted to be on a team that was more entrepreneurial. And so I found an opportunity to work with a company called CompuCon at the time. It's now actually part of ComSurge, so you can sort of see how the history worked there. But we were doing frequency coordination work in terrestrial microwave. We were doing satellite earth station work, land mobile radio work, and some very early engineering for the cellular industry, which was just kind of getting started. A few years later, I had an opportunity to start my own company focused pretty much exclusively on cellular. And we were doing RF propagation modeling, network planning, implementation support. We weren't climbing towers, but we were doing just about everything else. And then network management for companies that were in the cellular industry. And I started that with two other partners. We sold that business in 1997. And then I took a turn and went into early stage venture capital. I was a limited partner in one of the VC funds in North Texas. Did a little bit in private equity as well. And what I liked about that is that while I'd had my business in the wireless industry, as most people who are listening to this podcast will know, the demand on your time is so extensive that it's very difficult to achieve any kind of a lifestyle balance, especially if you're trying to do things like start a family. So once the business was sold, I actually had time to do that. And sure enough, our two kids came along. Then I got an opportunity, wasn't expecting, but a recruiter called me looking for someone who could fill a position in the U.S. Virgin Islands in economic development. And I'll tell you straight up, I thought that sounded kind of preposterous, but I was going to go kick the tires and see. And the undersea fiber networks that form the backbone of the global internet have to land somewhere and be repowered. And one of the major hub sites is actually in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Connects North and South America to Central America, Europe, and I think now even Africa. And the idea was, could the territory of the Virgin Islands leverage those hubs, there were a couple of them there, to benefit economic diversity? And so I did that for 9 years. To fast forward a little further along, ultimately ended up being asked to come in and serve as the chief operating officer of Broadband VI, which is a US VI WISP. And I stepped in 2018 and ultimately transitioned out after we had successfully sold the company at the end of last year. I knew Jeremy through a relationship that Broadband VI had with, I think it was Perseem at the time. Anyway, so I was thinking about what I was going to do next. I knew that I was going to be heading back to North Texas at some point. Some friends at WISPA got a hold of me and said that there was an opening and would I consider it. And as things worked out, I did. I threw my hat in the ring, went through the recruitment process and ultimately was selected to come aboard on June 1st. So that's how I've ended up here. And I know that was sort of a long way around the horn, but I hope what people heard in this is that I have a telecom background. I've been in wireless for a long time, in mobility and in data and in RF. I have been in the shoes of an operator that's running a WISP. Broadband VI has about 9,000 customers. To kind of give you an idea of where it sits size-wise, it's now part of the Liberty family of companies. And so I have a very special, heart for people who are entrepreneurial and are looking to bring something new to the marketplace in terms of network capabilities. And I've been there and sort of done that. You said earlier, why am I so brilliant? I would disagree with that. I know my wife is smarter than I am, and I presume everybody else is too. But anyway, thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, I really thought your talk, and I really appreciate you kind of giving us the background, because I mean you're kind of at the forefront of the wireless internet service providers, and our conversation with basically anyone outside of the industry. We have a lot of really cool and really diverse characters, and there's a lot of great conversation in there, and we interact with the other networking stuff a lot. But the larger guys and federal on that side, that's a whole huge conversation that we talk about it a lot, but it's very infrequent that I see big movement and things actually being stated. And I was very heartened. Let's see, I was doing some broadband. We had my last job, we had to do a testing for we were ARDA, no, ACAM 2. And so we had to do testing, and I was reading through the documentation from the FCC about how you're supposed to do the testing, and there's WISPA in there and their comments about, hey, how do we want testing done, and how does this affect people positively, negatively, and the FCC responding to that. There was another little bitty WISP. There wasn't other comments. There was other big corporations, Comcast, CenturyLink. They had big representation, but my company's input probably would be completely ignored by the FCC. So that it's there and is considered and impactful, actually, I feel like really is an important thing for the industry. So we've mentioned a few things about how busy you've been. What brought you to the set your pedal to the metal this summer?
Well, so my official start date with WISPA was June 1st. And by the way, for people who don't know, WISPA has been around in some form or fashion for about 20 years. It's not new on the scene. And to the point that you were making, Tommy, I don't think WISPA in the beginning was seen as a particularly impactful player by the FCC. It took really sustained effort for them to begin to see not just WISPA, but the industry for what it is. And so WISPA's enjoyed a very healthy relationship with the FCC, especially over the last few years, because they know who we represent and they kind of know how we got there. But anyway, I started on June 1st. I was finishing up some transitional work for Liberty and for Broadband VI earlier this year. And so I told WISPA that I would help out behind the scenes, kind of begin to come up to speed, meet the team, learn what the priorities that were then in place were. And then on May 13th, I mean, literally right after starting, the NTIA dropped the BEAD NOFO, which is the $40+ billion deployment of funds to accelerate the closing of the digital divide. And so that redlined my tachometer pretty quickly. And so I've been kind of running steadily ever since then as a result. But it's a continuation of the things we've done in the past, whether it's spectrum policy or the work we're doing with the FCC. In the case of NTIA, there had been a lot of advocacy work that had been done with them before. So when the Infrastructure Act was being passed or debated and then passed in late 2021, WISPA was active with NTIA at that point in time. So we've had good relationships in place, but I'll still say that the NOFO took us by surprise. We knew that they were going to be slanted towards fiber wherever possible, but the strong fiber preference that came out almost to the exclusion of everything else was a surprise.
Yeah, and that's really does seem to be where things are pushing in at the federal level. I think so like one of the places where I've worked on like funding in the past was back in Colorado, and I was very disappointed and disheartened. They'd been doing it for 10 to 7 years now, and they're the only of the like 112 projects that have been funded, only like 3-4 were entirely wireless based. Like a couple extra had like wireless backhauls or something in it. Everything else had been fiber and would own. They were really almost to the dead exclusion of it of anything else. And so it's really disheartening to see government agencies really pushing that and really bowling over wireless options in a lot of regards.
I think so. One of the things I want to say early on is that the WISPs, we see WISPs as entrepreneurial ISPs that are working in markets that tend to be either left behind or ignored or set aside by larger providers. And we have WISPs in major markets too, but that's primarily where WISPs are operating, and they're deploying all sorts of technology. Right now, WISPA probably has on the order of 20% of its membership on the vendor side actively involved in fiber. And a greater percentage of that of our members are actually deploying fiber somewhere. It may be backhaul, it may be, middle mile, but it might not be to the end user or to the, last mile because of cost. And to your point, Tommy, I think, what I've experienced in my industry experience, my career, has been that when people can see something, they can appreciate what it is. If you hold up an optical fiber and show it, it's like, wow, there's glass in there and this is wonderful. And if you start trying to describe what a wireless signal is, well, where is it? And why doesn't it work in my basement? That sort of thing you're going to get from people who are looking at it. So it's not about being a devotee of a particular technology, but one of the things I want to do is I want to be able to help WISPA and its members sort of shape the narrative in a way where WISPs are not just seen as, completely clinging to one technology over another, because the reality is that's not the way WISPs are behaving. They're using whatever the best possible technology, best possible approach they can use to be able to reach, their customers. And WISP had been through a lot in the process of doing it. It's costly to put up access points or to put up this infrastructure, and you have to get through in some cases, permitting process, or you have to be able to work around other sort of competing systems that are in your area. And then the federal government comes along and changes the broadband standards. So you're doing forklift upgrades on your networks. This is the sort of stuff that I think people don't really see behind the scenes. They just assume that my internet's going to work fine, and the government has said it needs to be fiber. And so if you're not fiber, then, you can't get it done. But as we all know, wireless does get it done, and for a fraction of the cost at a fraction of the time in many places, especially where we're trying to focus on the digital divide. So what I would say is that if you're in an urban area and you're trying to build a competing WISP, you're probably going to want to have wired infrastructure, some sort of fiber. There are certainly opportunities for wireless in that. But once you get into remote areas of Colorado, for example, it's mountainous, it's very expensive to run fiber at every endpoint, when if a customer is looking for gigabit service, you can deliver that today over wireless.
I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, David. This is Jeremy here. Coming into an organization like WISPA, which has had wireless as, part of its DNA since the inception, and to have, such a heavy focus on wireless initially, and, to find, of course, that, as you mentioned, that WISPA members aren't just doing wireless, and traditionally non-wireless companies aren't just doing fiber. We're seeing this hybridization happening here. How are you able to spin this narrative in the sense that that allows people to feel that their choice in the marketplace, and by this I mean operators, allows operators to feel that their choice in the marketplace is expanding rather than that WISPA is changing its direction, right? Because this is, we've talked about how it's difficult to come down with a completely nuanced position that captures all of a very diverse operator base. What have you been, hearing in your conversations with, let's call them your constituents, our fellow members of WISPA, both on the vendor side and the operator side, and what's that message that we're needing to tell on Capitol Hill to say, I don't want to lead you to what I think the answer is, but like this should be about choice rather than about being forced to fund a particular technology.
So, for example, I'll start with one using. As an analogy, first responders. And I want to be careful here, because when we talk about first responders, people can get kind of confused about what the intention. I'm not talking about people who are running into burning buildings, but I'm talking about people who answer the call in a crisis or in a situation where a community has a need. Many of the WISPs that I've talked to didn't get started because they woke up one day and said, I really love this wireless ISP technology I see out here, and so I'm going to make myself a devotee of that particular platform for the rest of my life, and I'm going to go beat this drum until everybody's head hurts. Instead, most of them started by living in an area where broadband service wasn't available, and they figured out a way to connect a close by network point and extend service to neighbors or to other businesses, and pretty soon they discovered that they actually had a business model, in it. So those people who have been doing that, which are the majority of the members of WISPA, are the ones who are not really caring about the core technology as much as, can I sustain a business model in this, and can I make a difference in the needs of my community? Coming back to the first responder, aspect of it, when we think about the federal level, this national priority we now have to extend broadband everywhere and reliable broadband everywhere. Well, if we're going to close the digital divide, and if this is truly a digital equity issue, then why in the world do we want to wait 7 years to close the digital divide if we have the ability to do it in a year? So if we were serious about closing the digital divide, and we're serious about a definition of broadband that is what it currently is, 100/20 or better, then why wouldn't you, as the Infrastructure Act said, be technology agnostic? Let the horses run, let them loose. And if WISPs want to use wireless technology to do it, and they can do it in a way that sustains a business model and can close that digital divide faster, then that solution needs to be picked. Because we all know that even we like to talk about future-proof technologies. The future is challenging to predict, and there is no truly future-proof technology. We're going to be replacing infrastructure faster than we think. And I'm not going to argue about whether that's 5 years or 25 years, but I think you get my point. And the final thing I'll say about WISPs that I think is really unique, it's fundamentally about resiliency. You look in South Florida, for example, after Hurricane Ian went through, the only surviving operator down there was a WISP. They had engineered their system to be able to stay up. Unfortunately, they didn't have customers that could use them right away, but they were there up and operating, very quickly. And that's classically true in serious storm sort of circumstances.
And that's
So
a first recovery infrastructure.
Yeah. And when you dig into that and you think, well, why did that happen? Was that because they chose the right technology, or they used the right building standards, or whatever? In some cases, that's true. But usually what it means is that the WISP is the one who's actually living in the community. They're hiring people in the community. They're eating in the community. They're banking in the community. Their kids are going to school in the community. They are the ones who hand out their cell phones to other members of the community so they know how to be reached. So if you're going to roll a truck to go solve a problem after a storm, chances are the WISP is going to get there first. So the narrative that I'm trying to oppose is one that says, well, fiber is really the only thing we can do now. And anybody who's not doing fiber, you guys are out of sync with the times. It's not about that. It's about what's our national priority here. If we're going to roll out broadband, if we're going to make it competitive, make the country more competitive, no matter where people want to live, then don't put your thumbs on the scale about a technology unless you're really, really sure that that's what you want to do, because the trade-off, is that you could be waiting years to achieve this sort of conceptual ideal solution when there are people out there right now on the front lines as first responders in our industry who can do it faster.
Yeah, and that's really, really well put, especially with the South Florida. And just as a side note, the WISPA you guys had a lot of different organized deals for getting help down to various WISPs down there. You guys actually, if I recall correctly, I know I was linking to your Facebook post. I think I was also linking to, there was a page on your website where you guys were coordinating efforts.
Yeah, and so for WISPA's part, I'd be the first to admit that while we weren't slow to that, we still need to get better at it because we had members in South Florida that started the process of organizing on their own, and they reached out to me and said, we really need a bullhorn. And so as WISPA Palooza was then happening, it's like, I'll give you the stage. So we talked about that and kind of promoted that, but ultimately it came down to the initiative of the people who were most affected and who were closest to be able to help. But that is an area where I think, WISPA can differentiate. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but I think it's important to, mention it. Before I arrived, the WISPA board had undertaken a branding exercise, and they really rebranded WISPA as Broadband Without Boundaries. And so you're going to be seeing a lot of that. You're seeing it already. And it's not to divorce from the WISPA name. The WISPA name is well known. It's been around for 20 years. But we do want to emphasize in our narrative that it's not about the meaning of that letter W at the front of what it is that we're doing. It's about entrepreneurial ISPs who are solving problems in real time using excellent business models and, in a first responder way.
I would say that's really reflected in WISPA Palooza, the last few shows that I've been to. The first show I went to, there was like a couple fiber companies and they were off in this corner side, but like these last couple of shows, it is very much there's cable options. I was talking to Justin Miller about some really cool cable options that he was talking to. Fiber all over the place. The biggest wireless companies are advertising and the wireless companies that make equipment. Like, it's really, the options are all out there, and it's a smorgasbord, which is really cool. And I love it because I'm a nerd for every single communication technology that you can make. So then what do you see, like, for guys moving forward, like as like a difficulty, transitioning between being wireless only to, hey, you know what, I have all these different options. What are the difficulties you see guys running into?
So these are going to be very generic, but I think you'll see these popping up in conversation from time to time. One of the first is that COVID itself really made everyone in the internet industry recognize how vital broadband really is. And so we went from being an industry, not just WISPA, but ISPs generally, that thought in terms of a best effort service. We're going to do our best to keep it up. Well, now the consumer demand is around having it up all the time. We used to talk in the telco world of telco grade 5.9 reliability. And I think that that's aspirational for every network operator at this point. But still, the disciplines that are behind that are pretty important, and they end up, guiding ISPs of all stripes to make better decisions, especially about the way they plan and implement and then manage their networks. Another, which I'll just mention kind of tangentially, is that a lot of people who start businesses, not just in the ISP community, but in any kind of business, they think a little bit about how they're going to get into it. Like, there's a market need. My neighbors don't have internet, so I'm going to go help, and boom, now I'm a WISP. But trying to figure out what the exit strategy looks like is really, really tricky, because in many cases you don't have any kind of experience doing that before. You don't know what the market conditions are going to be, but somehow you, as a business owner, have to begin to spend some time thinking about, well, what is it that I want to do at what point in time? And, what does that look like? Do I end up looking for opportunities to scale by acquiring other ISPs, or do I become part of another team? So these questions, are there too. But I think that, at least what's front of mind for me, Tommy, is that I would say that specifically for WISPs, many have kind of gotten tired of the notion that we have sort of shifting sands at the federal level and to some degree at the state level of what is expected of them. If you knew that broadband was going to be 10/2 or something like that, and it was going to be that way for a couple of years, you might engineer your network accordingly. If 3 years later or 2 years later is 100/20, that's going to change things that you're doing, everything from tower leases to what you're doing to, buy in the first mile, to the nature of the equipment that you deploy through your network, to what's happening at CPE. So all of that gets to be frustrating as you get more and more customers, which is, again, not to make excuses for it, but the challenge is, how do you anticipate what you're going to need? And to kind of underscore this point, this is one of the things that you don't hear people really talk about in the industry these days. If you go and take the average ISP, not talking about WISPs, I'm talking about, throw Spectrum in there or a company like that, and you look at how much bandwidth is being consumed in the first mile, where they actually connect to the internet on a per user basis, per capita basis, we're still looking at somewhere between, on the low, 2.5 megabits to, I'm going to be gracious and say on the high end, it's 7.5, maybe 10 megabits per second, but closer to 5. So if the entire capacity of your network going actually out and to and from the internet. That's where internet transfer occurs. That's where you're connecting to your upstream networks. If that's 5 megabits per second, why are we talking about a gigabit being required in individual homes multiplied by all your customers, when we all know that there's not enough subsea capacity to carry all that anyway? So, I stated another way. See, now some people will hear that and say, well, this guy really is a dinosaur. He doesn't know. But truly, if you go and measure that's the capacity.
I can confirm, David, we have the market metrics. Absolutely.
Yeah.
At
So,
so how do we communicate? So this becomes a measurement problem. How do we communicate that there's a difference between peak and sustained, or even like peak busy hour versus off peak requirements? How do we communicate this and make this become part of the broadband standard? After which this whole problem, it's not that it goes away, it's that now we have, like when you talked about the shifting sands of the measure of the standard changing out from under you. Well, the fact is that the internet usage will, we believe, continue to grow at a steady pace.
Yeah.
So why don't we model that as an industry? Why don't we push this as a complete shift in thinking about how broadband is specified? It doesn't change how it's delivered, right? Now we can choose a delivery method that has the correct planning.
Well, and to that point, if we were able to achieve some sort of common vision of that would help our equipment manufacturers, our vendors know what they're dealing with. That would guide spectrum policy. That would guide many, many things that are happening right now, instead of this sort of ad hoc system that we have in place right now. This is a little tongue in cheek, but how many people are going to download the Library of Congress and need to do it in 10 milliseconds or something like that? That's sort of the ridiculousness that we get to when we're talking about speeds. Having said that, I will tell you that my son loves to see that I'm capable of gigabit speeds in my residence right now. He'll do speed tests on that when he comes over. He's, wow, you have fast internet. Like, yeah, look what we're doing with it. When you add up all the streams that we've got for our Roku and Prime sticks and things like that, the way we're actually using internet, we're very much right in the middle of that statistic I gave you earlier. It's like, yeah, I like fast internet, but what am I using it for? And to take the analogy to a ridiculous level, when we built the interstate highway system, we built it between major markets, sort of as a backbone. We weren't driving, or we weren't building the interstate all the way to people's driveways. Yeah, I need to go 80 miles an hour down my driveway to get to the street. No, you don't. You don't need a 100,000 watt utility feed to your house either. You've got a, basically a 200 amp riser,
right,
240 or something coming in. There's a reasonableness test in here, how you size your sewer, your water line, or whatever else, the same sort of thing. So why do we get fascinated with the notion that we have to have a monster that nobody is actually, using? I would be the first to say that if we actually had utilization at the consumer level of gigabit speeds all the time, then I would be waving the flag for we need to be able to demonstrate that we can do this across our network 100% of the time.
Absolutely. The economics don't bear that out anyway. The whole internet is, the economic model of the internet is predicated on some level of oversubscription. And the problem is that the funding is not modeling that. None of the requirements are modeling that or taking that into account. We had a discussion about this recently on, maybe it was WISP Talk. Tommy, I think you might have been there, and we were talking about, someone was asking about a particular type of customer who was a radiologist of some kind, I believe, who had a home internet connection and was asking for a gigabit connection. And there are cases where you actually do need high peak download speeds, but they are rare. So the fact that we can't yet model this nuance to say, here's the curve, most people, as you say, even at peak busy hour, really can get by with a lot less bandwidth than it seems, versus all the way down to the extreme end of, well, I need to make broadband, I need to make gigabit available. When you look at providers who are doing wireless providers, for example, who are doing a wide array of speeds, the median customer doesn't even take that fancy gold-plated high-speed plan. They want to know that it's available, Right. So how do we nuance? How do we introduce this nuance to discussion to say that it's not that nobody needs it, it's that there is a curve here?
Yeah, so I've got several responses that come to mind on that. I'm just trying to ferret them out in my mind. When we talk about oversubscription, that is a traffic engineering term of art that has been used in everything that's ever been traffic engineered, including everything I said earlier: power systems, highway systems, sewer systems, water systems, telephone systems. They're all traffic
Urinals.
Yeah, all of them are. So
train
there's
system.
nothing nefarious about traffic engineering and internet connection. But you're right. For example, at Broadband VI, we were capable of delivering wirelessly gigabit both way service to customers who needed that. And so we ended up, in our case, doing some customer qualification to figure out what that need really was, so they weren't just talking about it, but it was actually there, and we could deliver that if that were the case. But I think, as you know, Jeremy, from the work that you've done elsewhere, if you go and actually talk to customers about what they're using, the sweet spot still for internet is somewhere in the 50 to 75 megabit per second range. It won't be there forever.
Yeah, maybe not even quite that high. What we find is that definitely under 25 megabits, there's some, I would say, demand is frequently outstripping supply. But once you get over 50 megabits a second on the peak plan, bandwidth consumption actually grows very slowly. It grows on the order of like a 4-to-1 or a 2-to-1 ratio. So throwing gigabit plans in everywhere doesn't automatically free up these, wow, we've got these uses, we can stream the metaverse at low latency. Those are all wonderful applications of high bandwidth, but they don't immediately create the demand for such.
So one of the things that we did, and I won't go into the specifics other than to give you the example because it'll be clear enough, but if we had customers who are on a 25 meg plan or something like that at an access point or a few, we would occasionally run tests to see what their actual demand would be. So these weren't throttled, but these were connections that were set a certain way. So we would reset them up to like 50 and then just watch the peak demand and what would happen. And generally, if you had a 25 meg customer, you'd see that the consumption would actually increase. It'd go over 25, but it would very rarely reach 50. So we tried the same thing on 50 meg customers to see what would happen. And I thought that our network operations center was going to come unglued because they weren't ready to do that everywhere. But, we ended up saying, well, let's just try it, see what happens. We did that, rolled it up to 100 or something like that, and nothing changed.
Right.
So this was not a situation where we had somehow pent-up demand that we were not able to carry through our network. This was a situation where we were seeing all of the demand that was being presented to the network. And it sort of makes sense if you look at it. If you've got somebody who's gaming at home in the evening, or they're watching television, or they're doing something else like browsing, or maybe they've got some file transfer going, you put all those things together. A Zoom call like we're on right now is about 5 megs.
Even less. I'm using about a meg in and out right now.
Yeah. So you can fit, and again, I'm being generous, but you can fit 10 Zoom calls. Who's doing that at home? And the same thing when you're talking about streaming services, there are lots of ways you can improve the efficiency of streaming. So it is kind of rare that you see demand at a residential consumer level that gets to be high. Business is completely different argument. All right. So you're asking, how do we nuance? That's a conundrum, because again, people hear the big number, a gig. Oh, I want that. I got to have that. Everybody says so.
Yeah, it's a super hard conversation. What about maybe like a slightly different pivot on that? Recently we've been having more stirrings of renewal of net neutrality rules at the federal level. We made it as an industry through the first round, and a lot of ways the industry, did really well because we were like, yeah, whatever you want to run, we don't care. It costs us more money to to keep track of what you're doing anyways, so we ain't gonna do it. That was always my conversation. When a customer would ask, I would be like, it costs me more money to have servers paying attention to it than it would be to just let you go through. So have fun. So what do you feel moving forward?
So as you can imagine, the advocacy around this is huge on both sides. And so you have to look at who's advocating and where the interests lie, sometimes the special interests. And so there's usually a reason why somebody is advocating for the meat of the matter in net neutrality. But as you said, and what we've seen play out, is that ISPs, the vast majority, I'm almost willing to say all of them, but I can't prove that, but the vast majority, they're not throttling anybody. They're not measuring for content. They're not doing things that are sort of putting their thumbs on the scale of what gets through and what doesn't. Yeah, if anything, I think the ISPs are just trying to find a way to shape their traffic so that they can deliver what a consumer wants more efficiently. But that's not to say we're going to stop you because we don't like what you're actually, doing here. So I think most of the members that I've talked to look at net neutrality and they're saying, why? I mean, we're already there. So what is it really that is being argued for that we're not already providing? And we'll see where that goes.
David, it also could be a case where, there are a few and vocal who end up being the focal points for whatever ire is raised. There's a very small minority of WISPs who want to influence their traffic in a non-net neutral way. So everybody else is like, what's the big deal? We're already there, Right. I kind of wanted to ask a related question about this though, which is, now we're seeing we're seeing some movement in the 6 gigahertz space, where we got the announcement yesterday that the automatic frequency coordination systems are now going to be able to be used in 6 gigahertz, which is dramatically going to increase the amount of spectrum that's available to WISPs. Are we, as since we're focusing as an industry on all of the methods that we can use to deliver service today, are we seeing some change in how WISPs are needing to advocate about spectrum? So, because 6 gigahertz is obviously a different beast, even from the licensed that we see with CBRS, which was a new beast. Like, are there future advocacy that WISPA, not to tip anybody's hand or anything, but are there some stories that we are telling each other and learning about here that could give us some additional leverage in the future as we're trying to tell this story that, ultimately, it all ends up on wireless at some point, whether it's your cell phone or your Wi-Fi at home. Everybody, when you get home, you want to connect to the Wi-Fi immediately, right? The Wi-Fi is the great success story of this millennium from a technological perspective. So are we, in the ongoing wireless battle, do we have additional things that we want to say to the FCC, just as we want to say things about how broadband speeds are measured, or how fiber is funded, or how technology is chosen? Well, any advances on that wireless front?
So the first thing I'd want people to understand is that there's a policy committee at WISPA that WISPA members have mechanisms of being able to join or to follow, and they help shape the priorities that we end up setting in work we do primarily with the FCC, although that's expanding to pretty much anybody who's involved in spectrum these days. So you mentioned 6 gig. Richard Bernhardt, who is our Senior Director of Spectrum and Industry, or Industry and Spectrum, does a lot of work on various working groups, Wind Forum, OnGo Alliance, things of this sort. And in some cases, he chairs to specifically work on the technological back end of how this is going to work, setting the standards. And then that's coupled with our policy advocacy with the FCC to try to make sure that the needs of WISPs is not just about opening more spectrum, but to make sure that WISPs are treated fairly, because there are competing interests. There's some that would say everything that's opened up by the FCC needs to be auctioned. It needs to be auctioned to really big blocks like, metropolitan areas, which would be financially prohibitive for many of the WISPs, to be able to go in and compete. So we're looking at both the back end, the standards, we're looking at the front end, what's the mechanism by which the spectrum would be made available. And we're also looking wherever we can at doing something that's going to fit within the vendor community. Because to the extent that we can take a technology that's already in place and expand it, because we're talking about band adjacency or something like that, then we find that vendors usually can look at that and say, okay, that's a relatively easy ask to be able to improve the performance of systems that we have in place. These are relatively modest upgrades rather than going and having a new piece of equipment that's going to work in a narrow band over here that maybe 50 people in the world want to use, that sort of thing. So you will see us active not only in 6 gig, but we're in working on the 3.1 to 3.45 gig goal band. We're working with the FCC on that. We're looking at higher bands, 37 gig, and we're specifically, like I said, I think I would defer to Richard or to Louis Peretz, who would be able to give you the blow by blow. I have a summary in front of me, but it's a few pages long. So rather than read it to you, I would just say that we are absolutely all over this, both from the back end and the front end side. And we'd appreciate, help from our members too, in the sense that if you've got priorities that you want us to be, focused on, we want to hear it. We've gotten some feedback, for example, from some of our members who are still disappointed that the 3.65, licenses ended up going CBRS. But the CBRS is available, the GA is available, and we were able to get that cleared, or rather recognized by the FCC as a licensed service for the purpose of the BEAD NOFO. And so, that can be a situation where you can eke out a win, even though you might have some members who aren't happy with the transition that, kind of happened along the way. So every voice is important in the process, but we are working.
On that side, David, is there just really no purchase at all with the idea that we can get that language reversed, the language which specifically says that unlicensed is unreliable?
So one of the things we have to be careful about on the narrative here, and I thank you for the opportunity to say this, is that actually what the NTIA said is that they were excluding unlicensed fixed wireless delivered to the end user within their definition of reliable broadband service. So that's a capital R, so that's a defined term. So what NTIA has told us repeatedly is that they didn't mean to say that unlicensed spectrum is lowercase unreliable. They just weren't including it in their bucket of capital R reliable broadband service. And when we've asked them that question of why, the answer they've come back with is they're concerned about future availability. And so we ran that to ground with the FCC. The FCC has said there's no problem with future availability of that spectrum. The question had arisen, well, maybe the FCC would eventually take the unlicensed away and license it, so it would not be available on that basis. Best answer I have for you right now is that their concern is that unlicensed spectrum, because it is unlicensed, can eventually be overrun with congestion if it's not managed properly. And so there can't be a guarantee, the notion goes, that reliable lowercase broadband service could be delivered over a congested network. So we've gone through the process of trying to educate NTIA on things that are happening, both at what the carriers do already. It's not true frequency coordination in the sense they're filing with the FCC, but generally competitors will work with each other to make sure that they are staying off of each other's, channels. The automated frequency.
Yeah, that does seem like a legitimate use of the term in that context, where we're, but everyone has, if you run unlicensed, you have understood that there is a rise in background noise levels, and spectrum does get, let's say it does get overused. It is a tragedy of the commons, but
right.
In most cases, however, that is not, to my understanding, a conflict between multiple fixed wireless providers. Rather, it's fixed wireless versus other applications of.
Can be. Yeah, so right, it can be. And so you'll find vendors, whether you're talking about vendors like Cambium or Tirana or Sickler or others. These are companies that are actively engaged in developing technologies that become more sensitive to the environments in which they're operating and can shift accordingly. In fact, one of the things we're doing with the NTIA next week is there's a sort of a technical exchange that's going on between the vendor community within WISPA, a subset of them, and the NTIA community to help them understand why unlicensed fixed wireless is reliable, even in the way that it's implemented today. So the NTIA appears to be in agreement. They haven't said this publicly, but based on my read, they don't doubt that unlicensed can deliver broadband speeds as they're defined today. They have a question about future availability. We're trying to get that particular answer to them in a way that they can sort of relax, because the NOFO is not really aligned to the infrastructure bill. The Infrastructure Act said technology neutral. So NTIA came up with this on their own. So there is an opportunity for them to shift. The upcoming election might be helpful in doing that, because NTIA, as a part of the Department of Commerce, has to salute whoever the president is. And although we're not seeing the president change in this election, there still could be a pretty seismic shift in the Congress. And we know that the Congress is following closely this as it applies to the rollout of the BEAD funds. So all of that's in the air. I'm not going to hazard a bet on how that's going to work out. I'm just saying that from an advocacy perspective, we've been working very hard with NTIA to help them understand what it is that we're seeing. And there are other issues with the NOFO we could go into. There's a letter of credit requirement, which we think is very problematic. They have talked in terms of, a hybrid fiber, or not hybrid fiber, but hybrid licensed and unlicensed solution would be acceptable to them. Well, what does that look like? Because you can find hybrid systems primarily in backhaul and middle mile, sort of as capacity expansion. But when you're talking about doing at the CPU level, those are a little harder to find. They're beginning to come into the market.
It's going to raise your costs significantly. And if your goal is to maximize coverage, back to your earlier point about resiliency and WISPs, having this resilient mindset, I gave a talk about this back at WISPAPalooza, and you are absolutely right. It's not a technology. Resiliency isn't a technology, right? It's a mindset, and it's an application of technology. Right. That it's a behavior that emerges out of good choices, right? So, on the side of making sure that WISPs can use whatever tool they need, since that's what they do by nature. They use the right tools. Ideally, the successful ones use the right tools, right? I just want to say I appreciate your efforts, the work that WISPA is doing, and wanted to give another plug again for that policy committee, because I haven't been able to attend for a number of months. I did attend for a number of years. I encourage particularly operators, not just vendors, to spend time, paying attention to what WISPA is. WISPA is working on a lot of things at any given time, and a relatively small percentage of WISPA membership take advantage of that opportunity to really make a difference. And the feedback that WISPA gets from its members is really critical. So I just wanted to put in another plug for that, David.
And I appreciate that. Our members are busy. I get that. I was busy at Broadband VI, and so we leaned on WISPA. We were kind of a consumer of information that was coming out of WISPA. And usually if you're going to get frustrated with WISPA, it's when something didn't go the way you thought it should go, or something like that. It's not because of a lack of effort or people are not paying attention. Folks at WISPA are working their butts off to, make sure that they're staying in front of all this that they can. And we are sometimes adverse to other interests and other times aligned. It's just the nature of the beast in Washington. And I get that. And it's now rolling out to the states. So the comment earlier from Tommy about Colorado, I get that too. So one of the things I would like to announce, to the extent that listeners don't know, we were able to secure a major expansion of our advocacy budget for state purposes. And so the ability for WISPA to be able to be much more active in supporting state advocacy is growing. And that's a direct response to the circumstance that we're in. So you're going to be hearing more about that too.
That's really awesome to hear. I guess what, coming up, and we have WISP America in the spring. So that's where people will get to interact again with a lot of the WISPA crew. What other shows are coming up?
So that's in March of 2023. And we're working with other partners, or entities we're aligned with. Nate, for example, there's a lot of overlap. WIA, there's a lot of overlap. I don't want to leave anybody out here. It's just, you find that, especially when it comes to moving advocacy in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of ways that we can align our interests. And one of the things that, even with firms like CTIA, I've worked with a counterpart there and I said, look, we're not going to be transactional in the way that we work together. We're going to be relational. So we recognize we're going to butt heads on some pretty big topics here, but I don't leave any stone unturned where there are things we can work on together, because members of Congress need to hear that, and the agencies need to hear that. And we need to be able to move, forward, making progress together where we can. And that seems to be, resonating. And in that time, we've had a couple of great arguments with CTIA, and we've had some pretty good. Yeah, that was a good deal to do together. So fantastic.
A related question, David, I have for you is, what kind of outreach is WISPA doing for, probably operators primarily, but also vendors, operators who didn't consider themselves to be WISPs, but have begun to do wireless and may not yet realize the work that WISPA is doing on their behalf behind the scenes. to expand that membership base? Like what are the things that we're doing this year, 2023 coming up? Apart from like going to fiber shows and having a booth.
Yes. Well, we've got a lot of vendors in common, and we have folks who come to our shows, and that's a passive, that's sort of not order taking, but that's an opportunity to meet somebody when they're kind of on your home turf and can see what's going on. We're obviously looking at what people are doing on the 477s and the degree we can see at the BDCs, so that we kind of have an idea of who's out there and what they're doing. But at the end of the day, it's not just about building a list of people we can contact and say, hey, you're a WISP, we might be useful to you. It really comes down to what are we doing that is going to be demonstrating value to both our existing members and the members that we want to be able to attract. And ultimately, people vote with their feet if they're not seeing it. So one of the things I'm happy about with the expansion of the state budget, the budget for state advocacy, is that, if you think about what we do at a federal level, I think most people give us credit for that. It's like, well, I can't do that. I'm not going to go spend a bunch of time trying to figure out how to navigate the FCC and NTIA and USDA and Treasury and White House. But when it comes to their own home states, in many cases, our members may have relationships there already. So they may know their congressman in their state office, or they may even know their broadband office CEO or whatever it's called in that particular state. So members might be more plugged in than we are. And so if we're going to be relevant to our members when they're working on state level advocacy, a place that's kind of more on their home turf, then we have to find ways to deliver value that is tangible to them in order for them to say, okay, WISPA really, helped me out on this one. And I think that we do have a real opportunity to do that, and we are doing that in several states already. But even in the case where we have a member that knows their member of, their state Congress, strength in numbers matters.
So
I know I didn't answer your question, Jeremy, but I gave you some breadcrumbs anyway.
No, I think that was a great answer, David. Thank you.
So even if somebody isn't a member of WISPA, I'm certain that you guys would love to chat with them if they can get you in contact with their state reps and give us. So and that can only benefit WISPA and wireless internet service providers as a whole, because the more even local governments that are like, oh, these little guys, they're awesome. They make our lives amazing. They make things, they solve our problems. They interact with us, because you see the big guys and they just, blow you away, like CenturyLink. They're the easy whipping boy for our entire industry. But it's so nice to see, interaction at a personal level and relational, as you were saying.
Yeah, we have strength in numbers that we rely on too. We don't by any means have all of the WISPs in our membership, but there are roughly, more or less 3,000 sort of identifiable WISPs around the country right now. That's the sort of latest model we've been able to develop, and they're serving somewhere between, call it 9 million, maybe 10 million subscribers in these areas that to the federal government look like the frontier. They're at the edge of the digital divide or whatever. That's a pretty impressive number. When you're talking about having a constituency of 3,000 WISPs serving 9 to 10 million people who are exactly where the federal government's trying to program all this money, that matters. And we represent a substantial part of that, but not all of them. But we lean on the fact that there are a bunch of WISPs out there, even though they're not members. So it's too trite for me to say I see nothing but members and future members, in the WISP community, but because people are going to choose what's best for them. But regardless, I think WISPA is going to be aligned to and delivering value, whether they recognize it as a member or not.
That's absolutely fair. Yeah, I know multiple WISPs who just never chosen to be members, but they're getting the benefit just as much. And WISPA's clearly has is the dominant voice of WISP. As we said, that's a diverse crowd and has many opinions in it. But I think WISPA really tries hard.
So maybe a little bit of a divergent mention on kind of manufacturers. Every year, a couple times a year, I see people talking about like, let's get together and purchase in bulk Okay, let's be big. Let's purchase big. Why doesn't WISPA do this for us? Do you have any thoughts on that? I have my own personal thoughts of how that would never work, but
So, Tommy, I would say never, but I will say, I'm not, breaking any code here, but I would say that we have looked at that in the past and we've watched other industry associations do it. And there are a few problems that you run into when you do that. You can end up in a situation where you've got kind of this co-op going, kind of for lack of a better term, trying to get some power, some buying power. And then the co-op buys a bunch of stuff that isn't consumed by, their members. And now the co-op ends up upside down. And so it's harder. It's not just about managing funds and about seeming bigger than you are. It's about, the fact that you've got a bunch of different players who are in the room who have different priorities. And it's not the best analogy, but if you think about, maybe in our younger days and when we're trying to find an apartment we share with 2 or 3 other people, it sounds really brilliant at the first. We all go in and somebody's got to own the lease, and then roommate number 1 gets married or gets a job in another city, and now you're down to 2 roommates, and how are you going to deal with the financial aspect of that? So you go in with the plan that this is all going to be great, but the execution ends up being trickier. And I think that's, one of the things that ends up tripping up these sorts of deals. We know of other industry associations who've actually done it and have abandoned it because it wasn't working well for them.
Yeah. No, that's usually where I feel like it's going to end. Well, so Jeremy, did you have like some kind of wrapping up? We're a little bit after where I was kind of aiming, and
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm very happy. This has been a fantastic conversation, and it's been great to get to know you a little bit, David. We didn't really you never have time at the show to talk to everybody for as long as you want. It was great to meet you, and it's been wonderful to hear a little bit about your vision for WISPA. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Tommy, for the invitation today.
Yeah, it was really great. Did you have any final words for people?
Just be sure to visit us at wispa.org or find a way to engage at any of our trade shows, or, by all means, hit me up by email. You'll also find me on Facebook. The email is dzumwalt@wispa.org. But I want to hear from you, and I want to make sure that you're connected in ways that you want to be connected to WISPA.
Yeah, definitely would be the way to go. So, well, thank you very much for doing this again. I want to shout out to Mike Wendy, your marketing guy, who has been amazing to work with for multiple years that I've been interacting with WISPA. He is an awesome guy. Anybody, if you ever get his chance, shake his hand, because he's a really interesting fellow to chat with.
I agree. Yeah.
I agree. I've been fortunate to have him work with me on the education committee at WISPA since we started it. And you're right. He's a real backbone. I love it. Also, little shout out, women. Yeah, the pink shirt is for the. Actually, yes. Jeremy, how about you? You just. I'm representing. Yeah. So it's one of the things that we've done as kind of a result of our work with the education committee at WISPA is started a Women of WISPA initiative. It's really taken on a life of its own. We've now had two sessions. One at WISPA America in last spring, and then one just at WISPA Palooza last month, and we had fantastic turnout. I think over 120 people. WISPA, told us about it in the recent numbers, and that's not an organization that's just for women. This is an organization that is to raise visibility and awareness of what women are doing in the industry and let them know this is a path. This is a path that can work for me. I mean, there are women engineers, there are women WISP owners and operators, there are women installers. Like everything that can be done by women as well. So it's great for me to be able to see that our organization, WISPA as an organization, has now risen to the level where we can actually sustain, additional kind of, like, you can call it a special interest group if you want, but additional pushes that are really about raising the awareness within the wider community as well of what's actually happening, this really cool work that's going on. So I encourage you, if you check it out on Facebook or on LinkedIn, there are groups in both places, Women of WISPA, and definitely try to stay involved. There will be another session in the spring, and I think Women of WISPA is also helping sponsor some of the ongoing webinars that are happening. So that's really great to see that come out of the education committee, and encourage you all to check it out. And a plug for the ed committee as well.
Yeah, so we were chatting about that last time. I was like, I gotta make certain this, and your shirt reminded me. So that's the excellent of it. So
Yeah, drop
thank
me an
you.
email at jeremy@preseam.com if you want to talk about either of those things. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And that's how you reach him. Thank you again. Patreon, /the Brothers WISP, all the other fun stuff. Everybody have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thanks a lot, Tommy.
Greg, it's the Brothers WISP. Let's take a ride through space on this mothership. Wireless networking. We talk about equipment and methodology, so sit back and start learning. Lighting up the tower so people can start searching. Shooting up the web in neighborhoods, net surfing. We got horrible jokes, we're loud and annoying, but we're informative facts, we're not disappointing. Just give us a listen, cause fun is the mission. I'm telling you, you don't know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.